Per Krusell, macroeconomics seems to be a common term here. What is the main question of macroeconomics?
Macroeconomics, when you open up a textbook in basic economics, it usually talks about business cycles, about short-run fluctuations in economic activity, like unemployment is up or inflation is up or down. This type of macroeconomics is a little different. You find it in textbooks, but it's very different because it's about a longer run where economic growth comes from. So actually the textbooks have been changed quite a lot since Romer did his work.
And so 20 years ago.
The part of the book that is about the long run issues has become longer, and many textbooks start with that now, when they used to start with business cycles.
So long-term growth.
Yeah.
What would Paul Romer say about that?
Oh, he asks where it comes from. I mean, he wanted to understand why some countries grow and other countries don't grow, and also why the world grows at the rate it does, and what explains technological progress. And I think it was by asking the question that he came up with ways of thinking about it that influenced a lot of other researchers, and it led to both empirical work and theoretical work, and actually an explosion in research.
So what is the main motor of economic growth?
I think almost all economists would say it's technological change. But the question is, where does that come from? Like, why does it happen and when does it happen? You know, nothing happened during the many hundred years before the Industrial Revolution in terms of technological change. And then it all exploded. But it hasn't been totally even, but it's been ongoing since the Industrial Revolution. And at 2% per year, the leading countries are just kind of growing and growing, and it's because of technological change.
And in what way did Paul Romer explain
that? He wanted to think about why it occurs and what are the good preconditions for healthy growth. And he thought about things like how society is organized in terms of patent systems, in terms of subsidies to R&D. So it's not enough to have universities, because universities are crucial, and they are people there at universities, like Romer himself. They are rewarded by these wonderful prizes. But you also need research in the market, and that's what he focused on. So what makes it happen in the market? What are the circumstances? You know, judicial system, all kinds of things that create the conditions for technological growth. That's what he was interested in. Then you have to realize that once you come up with great ideas, it's important that they spread to other countries. So many countries, I think, are not original innovators, but they adopt technical ideas.
And there is a big difference between different kind of products, and ideas are different from shoes.
Yes, exactly. And by thinking deeply about why ideas are so different than regular shoe type products, then he got somehow the clue to how to think about it. And he was led to think about many ideas are super cheap to replicate once you get them, but it's all about getting the ideas. And then that's when all these institutional preconditions come in that allow some profits, but not too much profits, because you don't want to restrict it too much, and how to manage that is a central problem. And I think all the people who are at governments around the world these days, they think about it the way he thinks about it, because they've read the textbooks now, and they understood that ideas are different, and that's just a framework for thinking.
So somehow you have to give birth to ideas, but who has the responsibility for that?
Well, if we live in market economies, it's not that there's anybody responsible. You need it to happen by itself, and that's the market does these things, and it does it usually fairly well. But he also pointed to how it doesn't do it enough, maybe. I mean, in the case of ideas. So he emphasizes that you need to give people patents that last for a while, to give them proper incentives to do things, to innovate, and you may also need to subsidize research and development ideas. And so I think governments are to some extent responsible, but a lot of it happens by just market activity.
So it's both. And the other part of the prize has to do with climate change, and this is really a very hard problem. It involves so many different parts of society, everything actually. So how can one model it?
Well, I think what Nordhaus did was that he became very interested in other sciences after his PhD degree, maybe even before, I don't know, but he did this interdisciplinary thing, which is very fashionable today, but I think in the 1970s, it wasn't very common that an economist would dig deep into natural sciences and also discover climate change as a potentially big problem. I mean, most people, for sure most economists didn't think about it, and many others didn't either. So I guess he had the early realization that you needed to connect all these things and build a framework for thinking about them together. So I think a lot of what he did was to simplify the natural science bits to the point where he could think about them jointly with economics. So there is sort of like you need to take existing knowledge, make it digestible for people like himself and for other economists, and ultimately for policymakers. So that was quite an effort. And in the early days, he asked limited questions, but still super interesting questions, like what's the best way of not exceeding 2 degrees of warming? A question that most people are super interested in today. He asked like 40 years ago. But then he asked more ambitious questions, which is, okay, but what is the best thing to do overall? Let's not restrict attention just to a particular temperature goal. How should we think about maybe what's the right temperature goal and so on? So he needed to invest for decades before he was ready to address these more difficult questions. And as I said in my presentation today in the press conference, we don't have final answers, but now we can just follow in his footsteps, and if we don't like exactly what he did on this, we change it, and that's what everybody's doing now around the world.
Yeah, and the most last report from this night, previous night, IPCC says that we have to stop the growth of temperature at 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, I haven't had time to read it because it came out at midnight, so not too many hours ago. So I'll have to look carefully and see what it says.
But there is 1.5 degrees as an ultimate
yes, but I
limit.
think the idea there was to say, what would it take to get us to not exceed 1.5? So I don't think that the point was we mustn't exceed 1.5. It was more, what would it take? Is it even possible? And I think that's my reading without having studied it carefully. And the question is, they say it's possible, it's very, very hard. And it takes things like special efforts to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So it's the technological
and it's
part.
kind of relying on future technology to do the job. And again, that's the kind of thing that Romer was interested in. So the two areas are connected that way.
What would be the William Nordhaus answer to this ambition to limit the growth of temperature?
I am not sure, because I just know that he has said that without advanced new type of geoengineering or advanced types of removing carbon dioxide, I don't think he thinks it's possible. But that doesn't mean that he thinks we shouldn't try. I think he says it's extremely difficult, and you have to rely on future technologies for doing these things to work out and succeed. I think what he would say, if I may guess, is that you should also figure out how much it costs to do that. It's not just a matter of doing it at any cost. So there is still a cost-benefit calculation there. I think he would answer, but you would have to ask him for the details.
I will. But what are the policy recommendations to somehow curb the emissions?
Yeah, I think he's for a long time been pushing the idea of just using global carbon tax. I mean, try to agree that all countries or all large regions of countries should tax carbon. And As an economist, this is kind of an obvious solution. I think it's gaining momentum, the notion of using carbon taxes. I think the idea is a little bit that if you have a sizable carbon tax, it will do several things. But one of them is to eliminate a lot of fossil fuel that's not really so productive anyway, or it's marginally profitable, and then it will not be used if there's a tax on top of that, and that's a good thing. But it might also induce more new technologies that can replace the fossil fuel that will be outcompeted. So I'm guessing that this is what he would say, but I want to emphasize that the prize is not given for any particular policy conclusions. It's more a methodological prize, so it's really kind of the tools we need to answer the kind of questions you are asking me now, not to kind of say what to do, and that's it. So in part I'm just speculating, and we'll see what he has to say when it comes to Stockholm.
Thank you very much, Per Krusell.